Welcome to Postpartum Unfiltered, the podcast designed for women to share their unfiltered postpartum experience. I am your host, Dr. Jillian Campbell, chiropractor, pregnancy and postpartum corrective exercise specialist, health coach, mother of two, wife, and woman on a mission to build awareness, help manage expectations, and provide a community for women to be heard. Hello, today we are going to start my first postpartum journey, and I'd like to start by giving you a couple of things that I think are relevant from the birth of my first son, and then we'll move into kind of the postpartum realm, and maybe one day I'll share a little bit more about my birth story, but for now I would like to focus on the postpartum experience. So with my first son, I went into labor around 1:30 in the morning on a Monday, and I did not have him until 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. So for everybody keeping track at home, that is 38 hours of labor. I did spontaneously start labor, but I also had to be induced, so I did get Pitocin throughout that labor. I had an epidural, and though my total labor time was very long and all of my pre-labor was very long, my active labor, where he was actually born, was pretty short. And he had a greater than 99th percentile head. So for anybody who is not familiar with percentiles, the higher the percentile number means that there are fewer people that have anything above that. Right? So he's got a bigger head than 99% of all babies born. It was actually so big that he had to have it looked at after birth. They had to do an ultrasound because they were worried that something was wrong with his head because of how big it was. And because his head was so big and I did have a vaginal delivery, I had a 2nd-degree tear. So because I wasn't progressing very well in my pre-labor, they did a few things to try to progress. So they did a membrane sweep, they broke my water, and when they did that, they noticed that the fluid was a little brownish, which means that my son may have passed some meconium, which is that first bowel movement that babies have. And when they pass that in utero, the concern is that they might breathe it in. So I did have some NICU people in the room with me when I gave birth. When my son came out, he was crying, but not really crying that much. They had him on my chest. He actually passed more meconium then. So first act of business from my baby was to just poop all over me. And they were trying to get him to cry more to make sure that he was breathing well and his lungs were opening. And then they took him off of me because he wasn't crying as much as they wanted. So the NICU people got involved. They got him breathing well and forcefully crying, and they checked him out. Everything was good. They put him back on my chest, and he pooped again right on me. That baby loves me. And so I was there, had my baby on my chest, just kind of taking in the whole scenario that I had just given birth. I felt very emotionally detached from what was going on. It felt like a very mindful moment, like I was noticing everything that was happening, but not really feeling an emotional connection to it. And I look over at my husband, and his face is covered in tears. He is weeping at the sight of his first child, which was really sweet. And so we've got him there, and a lot is still happening. The midwife is still down in between my legs, and she looks up at me and she says, "So you did tear." And she starts to stitch it up, and then she looks back up at me and she says, "Don't look at it." And I thought, well, that's the first thing I'm going to do when I get home. And so she's stitching me up. I don't feel it because I had the epidural, and my son's on me, and all of the nurses in there's at least 3 nurses in there, and they start telling me rapid fire all this different advice about what I need to do with the baby, how to care for him, how to care for me. And I remember thinking, oh, this is a terrible plan. I'm not going to remember any of this advice, which is exactly what happened. I don't remember anything they said to me. So hopefully it wasn't that important. And then they wanted to try to get me up. And because I had the epidural, they were concerned about the numbness in my legs, obviously. So very slow progression, getting me off the table, making sure that I could weight bear and stand on my own. And two of them helped me walk over to the bathroom. And they didn't really explain what they were doing at all, but they took me in the bathroom, they took off my gown, and they started spraying my undercarriage with Perry bottles, so little squirt bottles with warm water to just rinse off everything. It was a weird experience because I was just standing there naked, postpartum, straddling a toilet with two strangers spraying off my vagina, and I was thinking, does anybody care to explain what's happening? And the answer was apparently no. They don't know. They did not care to explain. But they gave me a clean gown and put me back in bed and said, here's your baby, bye. And so they left us there in the labor and delivery suite with skin-to-skin contact, me and the baby and my husband. And we were in there for about an hour. And so my son, when he first was born, opened his eyes almost immediately and looked around like, what is this bullshit? Why would you take me out of a nice, warm, comfortable womb and out here? And my husband always talks about how he didn't think babies opened their eyes that quickly or so soon. So after his disgust with the outside world, he went to sleep. And I tried to get him to nurse. I tried to get him to latch. I had literally no clue what I was doing. And he seemed completely uninterested. Honestly, he just went back to sleep. So we just all stayed there, kind of cuddled up for an hour. And then the nurse came back in and asked if he had been fed at all. And I said, no, I tried. And he went to sleep. He didn't seem to care at all. And she started scolding me about how he needed to eat and he needed the colostrum, which is that first fluid that comes from the breast. It's more dense. It has a lot of nutrients. It's more like thick, yellow, creamy sort of consistency, not full-on breast milk. And I was telling her, I don't feel any different. I don't think there's colostrum to be expressed. And she just walked over to me and ripped my gown down and grabbed my nipples and started pulling on them and squeezing them. And that was also horrifying because I really felt like maybe somebody should talk to you before they just grab your nipples. And then she walked away, got a little medicine cup and came back and said, you need to hand express your colostrum into this and then dump it in the baby's mouth. And I remember thinking, I'm no expert, but that feels not like a good plan. And then she left, and I sat there holding this medicine cup, and I gave my son to my husband, and I was like, okay, yeah, hand express. I totally know what that means. And I kind of futzed around with it a little, and I had no clue what I was doing, so I just put the medicine cup down and didn't give that one another try. And they came and they moved us to a recovery suite in the hospital, and we got all settled in there. And after everything was all settled and everything, my husband, who had been so sweet the whole time, asked, is it okay if I go take a shower? I said, yeah, sure, of course. We're good here. The baby's still sleeping. He's happy as can be. I was honestly pretty comfortable after giving birth physically, as long as I was sitting still. And so I just, sat propped up in bed, let the baby sleep in the bassinet. My husband took a shower. And he came out of the shower, and afterwards he looked at me and he said, oh, you know that feeling when you're just really dirty and you get clean? And it feels amazing. And I couldn't help but laugh because here I am, 38 hours after labor, 2 hours after birth, and I've been pooped on twice by our son, and I've got a crotch full of blood, and I have not showered. And I said, no, I don't know what that's like at all. And he said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I wasn't even thinking about any of that." Which is funny because he tried to be so conscious that he was just a supportive role during the whole labor and birth, which he did really well with. But yeah, I always laugh about that. No, I don't know what it's like to feel clean. That would be amazing. And so we were in the hospital for 3 days because my son, it took him a long time to pass urine, and they were worried that maybe something was wrong, but they give you 24 hours for the baby to pass urine, and he waited until the 23rd hour and 40th minute to pass his first urine. So he was all good. And he slept most of the time that we were in the hospital. A few hours after birth, the lactation consultant came in, and we were struggling a bit with the latching, and he really seemed uninterested in feeding. He really only wanted to sleep. And so the lactation consultant was showing me how to get him to latch. We got him to latch on, and he seemed to be sucking, and I told her the same thing I told the nurse, that I just don't feel any different. My breasts don't feel any different. I can't tell if anything's happening. How do you know if he's eating? And the lactation consultant told me, "Oh, you see the way that he is moving his jaw. He's doing some sucking motions, but then he's also doing swallowing motions, which means he's getting something. So it's all working out really well." Showed me a couple of different ways to try to hold him, find what was comfortable for me, what was comfortable for him, what worked best for our whole situation. And she left. And, again, later we tried to feed, and he didn't really seem interested. And then he slept and slept and slept. And the next day in the hospital, we kept having these conversations about the breast milk and the feeding him and what we should do. And they kept assuring me that he was getting milk, and I was saying, "I really don't think that's what's happening." And then they tried to, they suggested the hospital grade pump to try to see if we could get anything out so we could see kind of where I was at. And the hospital grade pump comes with just the default flange size, which is usually around 24 millimeters, and the suction is a lot stronger than a home pump. So they hooked me up to that. It was horrifically uncomfortable. I would come to find out later that flange size is way too big for me, so too much tissue was getting sucked into the flange for trying to express anything, and nothing was coming out. And so it was just this kind of frustrating, very painful 20 minutes that they wanted me to be on this pump every hour, and I eventually had to stop that. And after a while, and our son was fussy, we just asked for formula because I didn't think he was getting anything to eat. And so I had him there, and we were giving him the formula, and they kept telling us he can only take about 5 milliliters because his stomach is the size of a walnut right now. So just a little bit at a time. So we were doing that. We were really stressed about giving him too much because they were making that into a really big deal. But we also felt like there's no way he's getting enough to eat. And the second night he was so fussy, and we didn't really know what to do. And the night nurse came in, and she sat him up in the bassinet and held him with one hand, and she took her other hand and grabbed the bottle and just plunged it into his mouth like Pulp Fiction style syringe. And he just gulped and gulped and gulped. And she looked at us and said, "You have to feed the baby." And we looked at her and said, "Oh, thank you. That's exactly how we've been feeling." But everybody kept telling us we were giving him too much. After that, he burped, he slept like a champ, he was doing so much better. We felt some relief because everybody had been kind of telling us something different than what we had been feeling. And until this one nurse who just showed us, look, this is what he needs. So while we were in the hospital, it was kind of like euphoria. I was totally riding this oxytocin, pitocin high from giving birth. It felt nice to have the baby out of my body. I will say that I was totally not expecting my body to feel the way that it did after giving birth. I hadn't really thought about what my immediate postpartum body would look like, but I felt like the sound of a beach ball deflating. Like my whole abdomen was just like, and I had this big, saggy, like loose belly pouch, which makes total sense, right? You had 40 weeks to grow this baby, and it changed slowly over that time, and then just overnight you remove a human and expect your body to just change. I mean, yeah, it changes. It's just not going to go back to any sort of normal feeling that you had before. So that was interesting. They kept coming in and asking me how my abdominal pain was, and I had no abdominal pain. And I remember thinking like, am I supposed to be in pain? Because I don't feel anything. I felt pain in my perineum from the stitches whenever I tried to stand or walk. So getting in and out of bed and moving, walking around were the hard parts for me. So I did spend most of the time in the bed. I got up just to use the bathroom and to shower. And then when it was time to leave, we had to put our son in the baby carriage. And this one, if you've ever talked to a mom, they always make fun of this because they tell you in the hospital, don't carry or lift anything heavier than your baby. But then they tell you, you have to put your baby in the car seat. And they said, Mom, you have to carry the car seat out. Dad cannot, which I don't know why. That makes absolutely no sense to me. And they also insisted that I be wheeled out in a wheelchair, so that I sat in a wheelchair with this baby carrier and baby in my lap. And I got to tell you, when you've got stitches in your perineum and you are being wheeled over a bunch of bumps with a huge thing in your lap, you feel all those bumps. Everyone, yep, it's unpleasant. And that was the end of our little hospital stay. Everybody was good. Everybody was healthy. And then we got to go home and see what it was like to be a family. So I am going to leave this episode here so that we can pick up with what it was like when we got home next time. Thank you for listening to Postpartum Unfiltered. If you found this helpful or interesting, please share, like, or leave a comment. I love hearing your thoughts or questions about postpartum. Feel free to reach out on Instagram at postpartum.unfiltered. If you would like to share your story, send me a message on Instagram or head over to my website, drjilliancampbell.com.